So I am Paul Roben. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Innovation at the University of California in San Diego. I'm that good-looking guy there in that 20-year-old photo. Thank you very much, Roberto. I really appreciate it. Um, and thank you to the GFCC and HEDx for getting us here together, and of course to our very gracious hosts, Aston University. It's really wonderful to be here in Birmingham, and I've learned an awful lot about the success of this region. So it's been a great day. The weather isn't as good as San Diego, mind you, but that's okay. So universities, I mean, universities have been really pivotal in the development of innovation ecosystems, at least in some parts of the world, maybe not everywhere, but I think there's a lot of innovation ecosystems that really owe their success to the fact that right at their core is a university. They're performing a really fundamental role in their development. We've been hearing all day, of course, that that role is changing and that there is a need for us to reinvent ourselves and indeed reimagine ourselves so that we have broader, more fundamental, and maybe more equitable impact on our innovation systems. I think this is like the University 4.0 that Alex was talking about earlier. And certainly that's happening in San Diego from my experience. And that really, is what keeps my job interesting. And I really love this kind of challenge of where is the world going? How can we adapt? How can we really have a much sort of more equitable impact on everything? What I don't get the opportunity to do very often is to take my head out of my own ecosystem and, actually sit down with the experts from other places and really learn from them. So I'm really looking forward to this panel. Of highly accomplished people who really know how to build these ecosystems from the university perspective and learn from them. And I have a few questions I'm going to ask them, not the ones I sent you, I'm just going to scratch it. Yeah, okay, great. So I'll have a few questions, but I do want to take some time at the end to, do we still have that throw microphone thing? Don't put it away. I want to use it after this so that, if there's questions from the audience, we can have a bit of an engaged conversation there as well. So just going to get right into it. I will let you guys introduce yourselves, but can you set the context for us? Because all of our ecosystems are that little bit different from each other. So maybe you could just start by describing your ecosystem, like what are the sectoral strengths? What does your industry profile look like, or investment profile? Do you have support from the government and so on? And then we can get into the role of the university in developing that. So maybe we'll start here with Sam, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So I'm Sam Turner. I'm the Chief Executive of the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Centre within Queen's University Belfast. So from a university leadership perspective, I've been in this kind of domain of innovation centres for about a quarter of a century, and something that was quite peripheral to university. When I first started out, as part of the exec team of something called the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre in Sheffield as well, which actually helped to transform the east of the city and has become a kind of global exemplar of innovation districts. But in Belfast, it's very much a central part of the strategy and the leadership of Professor Sir Ian Greer. The ecosystem, so I come from this perspective of taking the best of the research and driving social economic value and engaging. So there's the kind of social economic sustainability piece. We've had 100 million investment from government to get started and a bit from local councils. That's been leveraged with additional funding. So we're starting with an ecosystem that's recognised the value of taking the best from a university that's excellent in research and teaching, and looking at how we drive competitiveness growth in the businesses across Northern Ireland, beyond attracting partnerships with industry and academics and universities across the UK and Ireland and globally by looking at things that we excel at that will attract others in, and also thinking about how do we address skills in a more dynamic way as well. So making sure the right content's in the taught programs at the university, working with colleges, but also thinking about how do you upskill the companies we're supporting and how do you get them ready to deploy and embrace the technologies we're working with. We talked about AI as a big changer, and it's already got data-rich environment in manufacturing. So there's strong government support and will for change. There's a real industrial pull. You've got some companies doing very fine without us, thank you, but looking, what can you do for us? And there's a recognition within the university in Belfast that, who else is going to make this change? And there's a responsibility to do that. And I've been working for 6 years as the CTO of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. That's the seconded into Belfast. It's a network of manufacturing innovation centres across the UK, in GP, about 4,000 people. The HQ is just next door here on the campus in Aston. And a number of examples of this working fairly well is kind of the balance of looking at place-based change, but also recognizing strengths that stand on a global stage to build partnerships, build investments, opportunities for industry, as well as opportunities for individuals.
Very good. Thank you. Padma, what's Nashville like?
So I'm Padma Raghavan. I'm the Chief Research Officer at Vanderbilt, and the title is VP for Research and Innovation. And I'm also supposed to be the Senior Advisor to my Chancellor, which is an interesting job in its own right, advice. But that's okay. So a little bit about Vanderbilt and Nashville. We are in Nashville, which is Tennessee, and Tennessee has had a long history of being one of those states that was split. When the Civil War happened, East Tennessee actually was with the Yanks, and West Tennessee went with the South. So Tennessee is kind of an interesting state. It's got character, like, East Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, West Tennessee. They all have their own culture and heritage. And it shows up around what are we doing the innovation ecosystem for that matter. So Nashville is Music City, country music, home of country music. I think all of you know that. But going back, as I said earlier, about 20 years ago, starting with Senator Frist and the Medical Center, there was a lot of innovation around health. Not just innovation in how you do surgery, but then how do you do the whole life cycle of managing healthcare? And HCA, which is a big company, is located in Nashville. Okay. If you move forward a little bit, there was the big automobile sort of manufacturing that was being onshored into the USA. And Tennessee was leading in that revolution, thanks to another senator, Senator Lamar Alexander, who also happened to be the chancellor of the University of Tennessee, the flagship state university. And as a consequence, Nissan has its US headquarters there. There's Bridgestone. You can start thinking of many different companies, Volkswagen, they're all located there. And around them grew a big manufacturing base. A little bit like what you're talking about, and it was organic, it's going around. More recently, we've been instrumental in Vanderbilt in looking at dual-use technologies for national security. That's because, again, Tennessee's got a very large population that's tied to the defense sector. Fort Campbell, which is one of the biggest Army posts, is straddling Tennessee and Kentucky, and that means they have a lot of problems to solve. And as we speak now, in this AI-powered world, we've come up with technologies that are being deployed in Ukraine as we speak on something as old as spectrum management, because that's very important, depending on, what's happening out there in Europe. And so defense is another sector. And most recently, big companies, big IT companies are coming here. It started with Amazon building its headquarters, and more recently, Oracle is going to build its headquarters in Nashville as well. All this to say is that we are showing what's happening around the world in a Tennessee-centric way. And with all the big companies, for us, the urgency is, how do we keep this innovation ecosystem going? Because what needs to fuel it are the small and medium enterprises that are tied to technology and can look into the future and come up with the disruptive technologies as these big companies put their footprint right there on the ground. But we need to be agile. And that's what's driving how we're building our innovation ecosystem. And with that, we see AI and computing as kind of almost like a foundation from which we can build multiple different sectors of innovation, health, defense, mobility, you name it, all these future technologies. Education, that's going to be really important too, not just higher education, but education, K through 12. I mean, COVID has changed how we're going to be doing business across all these sectors. So we're very excited about the opportunity and actually very optimistic. I think there's a lot that we can do faster and better than we've done in the past.
It sounds like there's a lot of parallels actually with San Diego with the health and defense sectors, and us being a Navy town and everything. So that's great. Peter, Iowa.
Well, thank you. I'm going to take us down a slightly different path and description. I'm Peter Dorhout. I'm the Vice President for Research at Iowa State University, and I'm entering into my 10th year here, coming up very soon. And this conference began with a conversation about where we are in the UK. We're in the Midlands, in the middle, very similar to where Iowa can be found. It was noted that this place is the farthest from any coast. We are actually in Iowa closer to Hudson Bay in Ontario, Canada, than we are to the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean. So we're kind of in the middle too. We talked about James Watt and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and that Industrial Revolution 1.0. To give you a little bit of framework about Iowa, during that period of time, they were still surveying what was then the Louisiana Purchase for where Iowa would ultimately be. So we're in the middle, but we're coming in a little bit later in time, as opposed to position. And during that time, Iowa emerged as a state and very quickly recognized the value of education, particularly for the outcomes of its economy, which is agriculture. So Iowa State Agriculture College and Model Farm was our original name, and as that would imply, the model farm and agriculture became the real focus of our strengths. We talked a little bit about the distinction between what are we good at and what are we good for. So I'd like to just focus a bit on the what are we good for aspect of that introduction. We really do aspire, as part of our founding documents, we aspire to be the trusted partner to deliver innovative solutions. That's in the foundation of the university, and it's something that I hold dear. We were one of the first universities to accept the conditions of the Land Grant Act that occurred during the American Civil War. We were the nation's first veterinary college, but recognizing that to do that and to be successful, we had to ask that question, what are we good for? And somebody else mentioned this conduit of knowledge, information in, or we are the university that generates new knowledge. We're also the university, and we take great pride in this, in our role as a land grant, to be part of the conduit of the knowledge in to the institution, because that informs then how do we go about creating new knowledge and how do we serve the people of the state of Iowa. Another couple of quick things about the state of Iowa. In comparison to the Midlands, the state of Iowa is 56,000 square miles. And one of the four members of the United Kingdom, England, is 50,000 square miles. We have 3 million people in the state of Iowa. So if you do a quick calculation, that means that there's one person for every 10 acres of land in the state of Iowa. And we like to say that in Iowa, we are outstanding in our fields. And we mean that both figuratively and literally. But as a state university, we're about 33,000 students. The city of Ames, where we're located, is an ex-urban. We're sort of in the middle between an ex-urban and a rural community. We're 70,000 people with 33,000 students, except on football Saturdays, where we crest 100,000. So a little bit of snapshot, and I'll go into some of our industry partners in a little bit later.
No, that's great. And I think we're getting the sense here, all of these ecosystems are actually very different from one another. So you were asking, I think, Roberto, can you develop a template to do this? I don't know. These are very different starting points, right? But it's a good question. Maybe we'll get back to. And Westminster, Peter, thank you for joining us remotely.
Yeah. London calling, as the Clash said in 1979, still rocking here in London. Anyway, just for chat and just for all of us that are not from the US, at DuPont, I've just finished 3.5 years chairing the Institute of Occupational Safety and Health that protects life safety, death, injury in businesses all around the world. Inspiration came from DuPont, who pushed safety in a way that it wasn't just about the workplace, it was about whole life. But for our American visitors, can I ask all us Brits in the room, just check out they're all right, because there was a pretty awesome significant event happened on Wednesday. So will you just check in on all their well-being, please? They may be fine, they may be a bit dismayed. But anyway, that was not to the point. So yeah, I'm in London. Just out the window here is Regent Street. We're in Westminster. So 200 meters that way is the BBC, 200 meters that way is Oxford Circus. And your question seemed to be like more about what does it feel like? Well, it feels London, dynamic, vibrant, diverse, pushing boundaries, bit edgy, living, alive. And just by way of examples, I've just come from a session where we invited 22 student unions from London to come together in our place to think about how they can become a movement that supports our students. Very diverse community, thinking about really difficult topics, but at the end going to campaign to make the tube system here cheaper for students. Last night we hosted the Charles Wheeler Award, which is a very famous journalism award. The winner was Michelle Hussein, who's you might have heard on the Today programme. So we were a community full of journos, old, young, international, thinking about journalism. Oh, and also thinking about how on the earth do we get truthful stories out to the public in the future when, linking to all the AI and all of that stuff, how, really working out what the truth is matters. I'm going in a minute to an event at our Centre for Social Democracy, where we've got people coming from about 30 countries who are looking at democracy around the world and seeing how things are. Earlier today, I was at our new 10-story employability hub, which we're building on the Marylebone Road opposite Madame Tussauds Waxworks Museum, because the 12,000 businesses in Westminster need a home where they can find talent to employ in their businesses. We're about 23,000 students here. And what we do with our students here, hugely diverse. I'm mostly the only white guy in the room. Half our students are first gen to go to university, 70% Black minority ethnic, about 65% women. Many have neurodiversity challenges and superpowers. And anyway, we're that type of community. And what we do here is we teach in groups. And we're hugely international, students from 160 countries. And our way of teaching and learning, which reflects the community we're in, is really all about hearing the different perspectives and views on the world, enriching each of our students so they become a good global citizen. And then we assess them, we don't examine them. So we're not interested so much in how they can remember what people before have thought was right. What we're interested in is how they challenge that and how they move it on in ways that fits their own strengths, gives them the confidence to go out in the world and make a difference. So they're able to apply and they're ready for work, basically. And the other thing we do with all our students is we've adopted the Sustainable Development Goal 4.7. So everyone learns about the broad United Nations Sustainable Development Goals around sort of equity and social justice, climate, peace, partnership, and prosperity. And then they're assessed in whatever their work is, whether it's fine art or the law or life sciences, on how their work applies to it. So we're like this, you ask about the ecosystem. We're this ecosystem of diverse views, talents, energies, business, community, edge, creativity, all together in a heady mix that makes a difference. But of course, the conference today must have been amazing because Birmingham's already been motoring that part. And that was even before Alex came. And now, of course, it's super powered. Anyway, I hope that gives you a feel of what it's like down here in London.
That's great, thank you. And really resonates with me, this idea of building the talent. I mean, entrepreneurship to me is a way of being. It's a sort of a creative, risk-taking way of approaching the world, right? If we can develop the talent to do that, then you have sustainability right there. So, okay, thank you for that. I'd like to move on to what are your universities actually doing in the development of these ecosystems? What roles have your university played? What have you learned that works as you've been on this journey? And actually, more particularly, what doesn't work? Because you can often learn a lot more from what doesn't work than what does. Who'd like to take that first? Padma.
Great, why not? Yes. So like, what have you learned, right? I mean, so of course, a lot of my career was spent in research, now stewarding it, but really doing it too, right? So if you think about research, it's often the long game. You take your time, being very thorough, very methodical, you're publishing, your peer community, et cetera, et cetera. But then when you think about innovation, I think there's a big difference. It's kind of fast and furious. And you need a lot of different kinds of people around you to do it. And I think it's from this perspective that I think we're looking at innovation, where we are. And an example of this is something that we did during COVID. As you know, COVID hit and things changed. One of our faculty centers, led centers, is in vaccine research. They've looked at Zika, you name it, Ebola, and all these things. Well, suddenly they got a challenge. They decided that in 90 days, they'll try to come up with monoclonal antibodies, which can be used before vaccines are developed to prevent COVID. Well, what happened? I mean, things went into overdrive. I mean, these are early days where people didn't even know, people are physical distancing, six feet, you couldn't even come into a lab. I was going around saying like, this group can come in and work because they've been dealing with Ebola, which is far worse than COVID. So, that should be okay. And they bought it. I mean, all of us, they were working round the clock. They looked at all their international partners because a big part of it was getting the biosamples and the biomaterials from around the world. Think of how much risk-taking that was. We broke all the rules. The federal agency said that, we gave you money for doing something else, but it's okay. You can do this other thing. Just do it fast. Can you believe that? I mean, the federal agency saying that, going away from it. And it was sort of all hands on deck. And we came up with some monoclonal antibodies, but we could take it only that far at the university. So we partnered with AstraZeneca to take it further. And we actually developed this contract of iterating with them to develop it fast over the next God knows how many months, within like 60 short days. Imagine the legal departments coming together to do that in the middle of COVID. Well, fast forward, all this happened, and we were able to develop the monoclonal antibodies that did get FDA permission, and it went out there. And what it sort of made us realize is that this whole thing about innovation is fast and furious. It's that strategic risk-taking. You're breaking the rules, and you need people. You need the government to be more flexible. You need the private sector to join you. You need all hands on deck. How do you do that? And that just means that you have to change the culture, right? Research is the long game. This is kind of the fast and furious game. And you have to build this community that's near us. Because what we did for COVID, you could be doing 1,000 times, across all engineering disciplines. Because what you need is the outside telling you what the big challenges or the problems are, and being able to iterate through it with multiple partners. And reshape how you're doing business as usual. You're no longer doing business as usual. You're benefiting from all that research and scientific knowledge, but you're turning it on its head and trying to come up with solutions and failing fast, but again, coming up with yet another solution quickly. So it was a lot of it that sort of culture change, the fact that the two are connected and yet different. Right. And that you have to approach this with a certain sense of humility, that failure is the most common thing. The failure modes are common, success is going to be rare. And the point that Chad said, like, do not be elitist about it. Just roll up your sleeves, get together and say that we are teaming together. This is a true collaboration. This is a community of trust, and we'll just roll up our sleeves and get things done. So a lot of it that's what's driving us and how we're approaching the building that innovation ecosystem around us.
I mean, that is so interesting, if I can just interject as well, because we found the same thing. COVID allowed us to throw the rules out, right? And suddenly, all those things that we thought constrained us didn't actually constrain us at all. It was us constraining ourselves by all these rules that we had built up over years and years and years. Maybe we should do COVID again, right? No. But, it taught us a lot, and there is a lesson to be learned. Somebody should do a study of this. How do we get over ourselves, kind of thing, to do what Chad basically said is, can you do this with me tomorrow, not 6 weeks from now or whatever. I'm interested though, did people retreat to their corners after COVID was over, or did that kind of culture persist?
Culture is there in many different pockets. It's expanded around the university, but there's still some people, when faced with a major threat and sort of, leaning in to get around it, I think people react in different ways. So there are other communities that feel like, oh gosh, we're tired, we're spent from all those sprints. Yeah. It's all over the place. It's a spectrum right now. I think all of us are dealing with it, and now the AI thing has hit, and I think that's again, a huge disruptor, because AI was always there, but the large language models just brought it to reality. Now it's a household name, and ChatGPT, everyone knows what that is. And so I think that's another thing that's coming in right on top of COVID.
Right. Peter, how's Iowa State doing?
So thinking about the role of the university and the ecosystem, and really this place-based idea of innovation, I go back to some of that founding language I talked about, which is to be the trusted partner. to deliver innovations, and partnership is the key. When the university was creating its research park, a movie had been filmed in Iowa. So this was 1989, a Kevin Costner film called Field of Dreams. And the Field of Dreams story, if you're not familiar with it, is that there was a farmer who was kind of caught in the typical challenges of borrowing money against the collateral on the farm and trying to get crops in the ground and out of the ground ultimately, and really struggling. And that was putting a lot of pressure on the family. And I will get to the point of the story. Brevity is the soul of wit, after all. But as this farmer was working the fields, he was visited by a spirit, old baseball player from the 1919 Black Sox, which was an infamous baseball team and incident that occurred with some cheating and betting and other things like that that were replete in baseball at the time. And it's a story about redemption. And so this spirit comes and convinces this farmer to build a baseball field, to plow under the crop and build a baseball field. And if you build it, they will come. If you build it, they will come. And slowly as the movie goes forward and as he grapples with this contradiction in thought, more spirits appear from the fields. And eventually he finishes the baseball field. And these teams emerge out of the fields. And one of the players is just awestruck with this new baseball field. And he looks around and he asks Kevin Costner's character, "Is this heaven?" And he responds, "No, this is Iowa." Now, you can take that a number of ways.
Anybody?
But the point of that story is that building it and they will come is maybe not necessarily the best strategy. But in 1989, the university and the community in partnership decided they were going to build a research park. Sort of with that philosophy of build it and they will come. And they came. We built that park based on the strengths of the university and the value to the communities. And who came? Ag-related companies, animal health-related companies. They co-located in the park because it was adjacent to the university. It was adjacent to talent and invention. It was adjacent to a workforce that they could develop. We ran a bus line from Central Campus out to the research park that takes essentially 15 minutes. So students could participate and work in the research park and still take classes at the same time. We built labs and offices, a park, a daycare center. Now, not all overnight, took a little while. I think the baseball park was built faster than we built this. But there's sporting facilities there, restaurants, a hotel, apartments. The idea was to try to build this ecosystem that now has over 1 million square feet under roof. That includes Boehringer Ingelheim, John Deere, Merck Animal Health, a host of startups, spaces for new ideas, new discoveries. But given where we were and given our location in this sort of rurally located institution, the only way we could do that was to focus on the strengths and what those companies were really after and continue to build it through that. So sometimes you can build it and they will come.
And they did.
And they did.
I'm curious. We're about to build a research park like that as well, actually. Not a baseball field, no, unfortunately. We're not a great sports place, but anyway. Any part of that that didn't work? Any part that you would have taken? I know that's always a hard question to answer. But...
So there are parts that clearly don't work, and there were some lessons learned. Trying to create spaces and encourage faculty to participate. You need to begin that conversation with faculty and ensure that there's an understanding of what this space really is about, as opposed to merely an extension of my chemistry lab that's out at the research park.
Right.
And part of that is ensuring that they understand the contract law and the cost of laboratory spaces in the real world as opposed to in the academic realm. But really ensuring that you set your expectations out very early on. And I pick on faculty because I'm one and it's easy to do. But everyone needs to understand what the expectations are and have that sorted before you really begin. Otherwise, you can build and they will come and they will never go away.
Yes. Yes. Peter at Westminster, what's the university doing to build the ecosystem there?
Well, before that though, even though I'm 100 miles away, I'm feeling a bond with Peter. Peter, I don't know if you're feeling it back. Just to say, so I'm Vice Chancellor and President. I run the university. You're Vice President Research. My priority is well-being. So in addition to being Vice Chancellor and President, I'm self-appointed Chief Officer of Student Joy, which includes me being Chief Dragon. And all our sports team here are called the Dragons. Anyway, even though you're Director of Research, you seem to tell your best stories using sports and analogy. So if your Cyclones want to take on the Dragons here in London, or if you're willing to host them back in Iowa, I'll send a team over. How's that?
So that's quite the challenge because in fact, our college football team will be in Dublin next August, playing in another university's football team. And so perhaps a side trip would be in order.
Yeah, but I use that analogy actually to answer your question as well. So I think, and as we've already heard from the other panelists, the great joy of being in university is you can think very much about what you give, not what you get. What do you give? What do you give your community? How do you support your community in many different ways to help it to be a better community? How do you play a civic role that helps create a supportive framework for your community? How do you give it energy? And also, how do you give it safety? So how can you be a place where it doesn't matter who you are, what your interests are, the one place you go where you feel safe, knowing you get support is your university. And of course, that's the examples we've just heard are great examples of that. And there are many more. On the sports side here, I say my priorities around well-being. I worry like crazy that one of my 23,000 students is somewhere feeling lonely and unhappy. One of the ways in which, so I've got all the treatment and support systems that are needed. But of course, one of the counters to that is you create a community where they do things alongside their studies to make friends. They paint, they cook pizza, they have debates, they play basketball, they do gymnastics, whatever. And now I'm at a point where 13,000 of my 22 or 23,000 students are active every week in club or society. And that, of course, is with a community, half of whom commute. Nearly all my students have jobs, but still they're finding time to come onto campus, make friends, be themselves. And that also supports their studies. But that's not the only thing. If you go to our basketball place, for example, the Den, the local college kids, many of whom suffer from imposter syndrome and can't imagine themselves in university, they come and play alongside our Dragons. They are inspired by our Dragons, and our Dragon students speak to them, and I speak to them too, about how if they went to university, they could play sport and they could get a degree that transformed their lives. Here next door, we have Regent Street Cinema, which, by the way, you're always welcome to. And it's where the Lumiere brothers showed the first ever public showing of film in 1896. On a Monday, when I came here, right in the heart of London, but I found there were lots of older people who live on their own in flats, on their own, feeling lonely. So on a Monday, if you go to our cinema, it's full of older people who come in, we give them tea and cake. One of them plays the original organ and they do a sing-along, then they watch an old film and do a bit of dancing. It's another way of giving. That place I mentioned on Marylebone Road is going to be a place for businesses. So I think the key thing for all of us is to look out and think, how do we give? And also, like in Birmingham, it's not about how Aston competes with Birmingham City, competes with the other ones that are there. There's a Birmingham University, isn't there? It's about how collectively we work together. That thing I was hosting earlier today for 22 student unions of London, and I'm also deputy chair of London Higher, which has 50 universities of London. The point there is we're collegiate and we're working together to make the maximum impact we can. So I think by way of a philosophy, thinking about what you give with energy, with safety, is sort of what we do. And in a very challenging world, we need to do it even more. And don't worry about what you get. Don't worry about the money. Don't worry about what you get back. It doesn't matter. Collectively think what we give and do it even more.
That's great. I think the tagline, Roberto, of this thing should be "What are we good for rather than good at," right? We should bring that to Belfast. Sorry, Sam.
Yeah, well, I suppose I partly answered this question instead of the one you asked me the first time around, but I'll build on it. So, in Queen's, some of you have heard Professor Serene Gray speaking this morning. Queen's has always been, well, for the last quarter of a century or so, a strong convener, bringing communities together in Northern Ireland and across the world. It's very conscious of its presence in the city. Like most universities, the impact directly of students and staff in the middle of the city, but also the arts with cinemas, theatres, museums. But the Innovation Centre I'm in is one of three. This is a very intentional, explicit, strategic part of the strategy 2030 for the university about how do we build on the strengths we have and improve the lives of people in Northern Ireland. So I lead a manufacturing centre. There's also a centre on digital and cyber, and also one in health. And these are all new, bring government funding in and taking them forward. And Northern Ireland, is a fairly unique place within the UK. I talked about, elements of how we kind of represent the UK ecosystem, but it's a place that's proud of its peace. And you've got two communities, one who looks very much towards Ireland and one who looks towards Great Britain, and proud of those identities, rightly, but those identities, when times aren't well, can turn into tensions. So part of the goal is how do we make sure things are good for everybody, that the successes are felt by everybody. And I think this is part of things we're reflecting on earlier, and across the whole conference today about elites and connectivity with communities. There's a conscious effort to do that through the various centres that we're running. So how do we improve those lives? How do we reach out to people through the centres and improve performance of companies through competitiveness, technology, improve opportunity, the skills of those people in those companies, but also attracting new talent in, working with schools, showing them new opportunities from the communities who may have drifted into paramilitaries, but showing them opportunities in careers that they wouldn't have otherwise engaged in. And trying to drive social value, particularly things like sustainability, which is becoming increasingly prominent, but showing, and Northern Ireland also now, it was in the middle of the Brexit storm. Things have settled probably favourably for Northern Ireland. We have the Windsor Framework Agreement and a dual market agreement, the only place in the world where you can put a manufacturing facility that serves Europe and the UK. So some great opportunities there, and how do we make the best of these is a focus of what we're trying to do. The university trying to do through our centres, as well as through other means and policy, and the strong convening and political connections we've always had within Queen's. I was reflecting when Chad was talking earlier about the three big challenges that we're all facing, and I think very thought-provoking and probably things that crystallising things we're all thinking about, but put incredibly eloquently and a stark call to arms, I suppose. And one thing I was reflecting on when you were speaking, Chad, again thinking about this divide sense in the world of the elitists and the perceived elites and the people who feel disconnected. We have a role in these centres to deliver what the broader community wants and need right now. And how do we balance that whilst also looking at how we prepare them and play our role in preparing the nation, the world at large, for the big challenges we're facing. And it's difficult to do both. It's difficult for any organisation to do both, but maybe universities are a better place than others to try and do both of those things in partnership, clearly, with others. So there's a role in looking at, giving people what they want now. If we're looking just at the big challenges, there's a risk of becoming further disconnected and actually not taking the people with us that we need to address those challenges. So can we give people what they need now, whilst also thinking about how we work with them to prepare them, how we work with government, how we work nationally, internationally with other partners, to think about how we prepare for those big challenges in terms of, you can frame it in other ways, but I think the way you frame them, Chad, is really brings it down to the reality and the risks. We can talk about sustainability and digitalization and global warming, but when you talk about weather, you talk about instability and maybe war and supply chain risks, and you talk about AI, people get that. And I think there's a bridging role in helping people now, making people connected, better, allaying fears, providing opportunities, but in doing so also looking at how do we ready for a very near-term future. This is not thinking about something 10 years out, it's now. So we're thinking about how do you balance those two challenges and the sensors we have with the kind of wealth of talent and academic expertise and the political connections that we have within university all come together, really.
Yep. I'm really glad you brought up the sort of, I'm going to call it inclusiveness, but broader impact of what we do as well. I think that's so incredibly important. I mean, San Diego's a life science place, it's healthcare and all that. You go to any of these gatherings of executives and it's 90% white, middle-aged guys like me, in a town where 30% of the people speak Spanish as their first language. So it's all wrong. And it's geographically wrong. And I do think that we had this discussion over breakfast that, maybe universities aren't doing it, but I think we have to think about how do we do it to bring everybody along. It's not just an altruistic thing, it's a competitiveness thing, right? We're not going to be competitive if we're leaving 2/3 of society behind. So I think this is part of the University 4.0. How do we sort of evolve, I guess, to be able to do what Peter in Westminster was saying. How do you give, right? And it doesn't have to come back directly, immediately to you, but in the long term, I think it will. I think you're about to kick us out, aren't you? Yes. Okay. With that, maybe that's the closing comment then, unfortunately. But
could I just say something before you conclude, or not? A very short one, just to say, I'm not with you, obviously, but it's great you've got this event. It's great you've got all this partnership from so many places to be together. And I just give you a view from London about Birmingham, Aston in particular, since Alex has come, but also some of the others. It's like there's an energy source, like we have here in London. I'm feeling it in Birmingham. It's moving, it's motoring, and it's needed. And for all of you that are in the room that are guests today, I'm sure you're doing it, but just know that you're in a place where things are going with excellence and quality and inclusion, and it's worth hooking up, working out what to do together and just pushing the energy on. So, and I really commend everything that's going on, in your city. I think it's just great. And the university is doing exactly what it needs to do, which is to be an energy source that forms collaborations that actually make a difference to people so needed at the moment. So I hope you don't mind me saying that.
I think that is a fantastic note to end on. So thank you very much, Peter. And
Okay, pleasure.
can you all join me in thanking the panel, please?